Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak here today. So before I start, I want to give you just a little bit of context on myself. I am a software developer with a good 20 years of experience working for the industry, but also within academic context. And with that function, I'm part of the research project Participatory Image Archives, like my colleagues Max and Julien. And let's start this. So there is a certain archetype of artifacts in science fiction that I'm very fascinated with. They're often portrayed as geometric sculptures in rugged landscapes, hinting to spacefaring folks and civilizations long time ago. They are usually some kind of archive holding knowledge, or as the case with the Space Odyssey monoliths guiding civilizations. And here comes the science fiction part. They always seem to work flawlessly after thousands of years without any maintenance or bug fixing. So in the following minutes, I would love to talk about this temporal sustainability, especially in relation to prototyping, one of the more ubiquitous methods in practice. I want to take up the challenges around prototyping in a research setting, especially how it relates to the research project that I'm part of. And to end this presentation, I will propose participatory processes for producing sustainable prototypes. There will also be a trajectory from exciting theory to mundane practice in these talks. I'm sorry for that. Let us begin with framing prototypes. I'll speak from a position where artifacts mean prototypes and prototypes mean software. That's just my context that I'm in. So by their nature, prototypes are highly dynamic and fragile objects. This is expressed in two aspects. They're never quite fixed in time-space because they are constantly worked on iteratively. And they're usually also dished out rather hacky without much thought about technological sustainability. That leads to all kinds of data rots and software entropies. Due to failing dependencies, costly bug, breaking environments, and other reasons. So prototypes become usually unusable much quicker than well-concepted technologies. So in relation to my own research setting in our project right now, I can identify 3 different approaches of defining prototypes, which are, of course, entangled. So we have prototypes for testing a thesis or a concept. We have prototypes as epistemic objects, and we have prototypes as boundary objects. So a simple and straightforward definition of a prototype would be that it's an early sample model or something to test a concept or a process. And this makes them epistemic objects. Through their coming into being, we can ask and sometimes answer all kinds of pragmatical questions. Prototypes as epistemic objects are approximations of something, enabling us to evaluate what is missing. Like a laboratory setup for other disciplines, prototypes become essential materialities for our research practices, without which we only could dabble in the conceptual. The technological and prototypical artifacts that we create are an indispensable support for our research and epistemological strategies. And they contain knowledge that we can't express otherwise, for example, in a paper, which makes their long-term survival actually quite important. So Susan Lee Starr's boundary objects moves prototypes into social spheres. She proposes that technological artifacts build networks of relations with us, And most importantly, that they possess their own kind of agency and are important actors figuring as mediators in our research networks. Stars boundary objects have communicative qualities in that all actants can inscribe their own kind of meaning into the object while maintaining a collective or communal identity. An approach which incorporates these three main aspects that I just mentioned is the approach of design researchers Pofilatos and Spirou. In their view, prototypical artifacts are essential parts of a process of design semiosis, which is the study of meaning in the field of design, addressing the way in which designers and users make shared meanings by the means of artifacts. An artifact is then not only a thing that we produce to test a thesis, but is seen as an assemblage together with its producers and users, which is very well expressed in this model by Luna Gasparini. Here we see that the artifact is in an integrated loop together with the designer and the users. At this moment, our prototypes become object and method at the same time. It is a thing that we manifest for a specific goal. We want to test something, but it's also a communicative process that we have with our peers through the means of this prototype. And I really like this quote: "The artifact is thus to be conceived as a place where a common mind is shaped." Okay. In the following, I would like to give you, I would love to form this more theoretical excursion in the research project that I'm part of. And this here is taken from our funding application. So the goal of our research project is to create a platform for participatory digital research on archival images and their metadata. This will involve, amongst other things, the implementation of an overall prototype. So I've already talked about prototypes and would love to expand on the second big thing that is in there, and that is the participatory approaches. So participation is a concept and term which is often contextual and subject to unspoken assumptions. In our research project, we often refer to this model by right to locate where we would see a process or function of this set platform. As an institutionalized archive, we move a bit closer to the lower middle of this model. And the reasoning for our funding application involved that moving higher up in this model might be beneficial for the archive as well as the participants. So we are coming together from three different disciplines. We have cultural anthropology, we have digital humanities, and we have design research. What unites us all is this idea of a prototype. Now the problem arises from what this prototype is, has to be, or could be. The idea of it is a boundary object that we are in constant discourse over. The challenges that arise from our organizational structures as an interdisciplinary team can be directly linked to the definitions of prototype I carried out earlier on. We have the need for epistemic objects by our 6 PhD candidates. We are also heavily reliant on prototypes as a boundary object, as a mediating actor in our research team. And last but not least, we need to combat all kinds of technological rots and entropies, and in a best case scenario, produce something of lasting value that survives the limited lifetime of this research project. I wanted to give you these brief impressions on the structure of PIA because it substantially influences our methods and our practice. We are interested in prototypes which are method and output at the same time. This creates the problem of practice versus imaginary, which I have the feeling most of us experience in their practice. Different actors expect or need different things. So we try to work through these differences by participatory approaches. So we are not only using participation with the people outside of the project, but are also interdisciplinary. We are in a constant discourse in which we try to let the other disciplines take part in our own discipline. And this is basically a communicative approach in which shared vocabularies are created and knowledge is stabilized. On a more abstract layer, this can also be seen as attempts of creating interfaces between the disciplines and team members. And these interfaces then enable translation of discipline or practice-specific processes and knowledge. Now, my thesis is that the same approaches that we use for participants outside of the project, but also interdisciplinary, might be beneficial to ensure prototypical sustainability. So what I'm proposing now is to expand on the approach of seeing prototypes through design semiosis, and understanding them as a mediating device enables us to use communicative strategies. This should theoretically create access and participation in the prototype and leading to more sustainable prototypes. The key point is to embed or weave them tighter into the networks that they are already part of, ensuring epistemological participation stabilizes the object, or at least snapshots of it, and makes them accessible over longer time periods. So now we come to the mundane part. I isolated 3 different but entangled rough strategies that I think are ways that make our prototyping more sustainable and stable. So we have, of course, reduce complexities and dependencies, which is mostly about maintenance in infrastructure. Then we have artifacts at human scale, which tries to let less technical skilled people participate. And of course, documentation, which is geared towards people which are a bit more on the technical side. So a real engineer, unlike myself, once told me that I should always use the weakest technology to solve a technological problem. By weakest, this person meant the easiest to implement and maintain, extend, or replace. So these kinds of technologies, they usually come with little dependencies and added complexities. So I don't have a concrete example for this, but it is a thought that I try to incorporate in every single technological decision that I make in this project. Using the weakest technology lowers the expectation towards technological expertise and creates more access and participation on that level. The second approach tries to expand on the first one. If prototypes are boundary objects, that helps to share and stabilize knowledge within the research team, then the choice of technologies need to reflect that. In our project, we started out with a Postgres SQL database for its extended functionalities, but then moved to SQLite to reduce complexities. But in processes, in cases where several team members have to work with database layouts or content in a more programmatically way, but can't code, we use comma separated value text files because they're open. They can open the database, so to say, then in a sheet software. This might sound straightforward, but under the given factors given in this presentation, it's a very conscious choice. And no participatory approach would be complete without documentation. Documentation is everything and still neglected even by myself, if I can be honest. And in PIA, we attempt to use a 4-layered documentation model that resides on a spectrum from having technological expertise to to wanting to be informed about the technological possibilities. So the 4 layers in that order are technical docs, technical guides, project examples, and public entry points. I want to lead you through these 4 layers with an example of documenting an API. So the first layer is for readers who have intimate knowledge they're very well versed with technologies, and they usually need to know how to solve a specific problem. The guides here with a screenshot taken from the fantastic Victoria and Albert documentation, guides to the same public, but is written a bit more linearly and gives a better overview of what are the possibilities. Then the 3rd layer is project examples or data explorations, which I personally find super interesting because they show real world examples and they're geared a bit more towards people who are just at the start of their coding journey. So at one time there's a pedagogic value of it, but it also shows what's feasible. And the last bit is often something that is not done. Oh. So, and that is public entry points. These ensure that a documentation is found through all kinds of public search queries. And it's making sure that people know that this kind of documentation exists. This can be, for example, blog posts. Victoria and Albert often mixes in with their normal blog hints that they have some kind of developer documentation. So these are 3 strategies which I deem relevant to what I'm doing right now. There are probably others, better ones. I would love to maybe later hear from you what are your strategies to let people participate in what you are producing. And let's recap quickly to wrap this presentation up. Am I still in time?
Yes.
Good. I introduce prototypes not only as little experiments to test stuff, but as an important epistemological object for our research. I followed with looking at prototypes through STAR's boundary objects, making them important nodes of exchange in our networks of research actants. And then I expanded upon this notion through design semiosis. Given my remarks in this presentation, I wanted to propose participatory processes as beneficial for the sustainability of prototypes. The reasoning is that the more accessible an artifact is, the more people can passively or actively participate in this design semiosis. It is akin to treat the prototype as a communicative device that lets all participant actants share and stabilize their knowledge. So as part of PIA, and personally, I'm highly interested in producing things that last the limited lifetime of such a research project. And for me, digital technologies haven't yet proven to be able to deliver such a need, to such a need. I see much potential in creating artifacts that can be translated and transformed. And the way to do that is to make them as accessible as possible through participatory approaches. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.